And the world in the last 10 years, the pace of change, whether it's geopolitics, the rise of China, the advance of technologies, whether it's unmanned systems, precision weapons, defense electronics, of course, artificial intelligence, are the sort of structures by which our government assigns, develops requirements, and actually contracts for a lot of this stuff has not changed.
Welcome to the Future of GovCon, a weekly podcast that looks at what is happening now and how it will impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer, owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I talk to influencers across the industry every day. C-suite executives, growth officers, diplomats, senior government officials, and top flag officers. Every week, we bring in experts from across GovCon, cyber, AI, space, NATO, medical, and more. And we'll have them share the key trends happening today and how our industry will look in the years to come. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Future of GovCon. I'm Jake Frazer, the President and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. Today we are thrilled to have a legend in the industry. Bill Bodie is calling in from DC. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm great, Jake. Nice to be here. Even if I'm just a legend in my own mind, nice to hear the word legend.
Well, I remember you used to be, I was in KBR when you were in KBR, and you were the guy in the press releases and the earnings reports and, the guy way up there that you weren't allowed to talk to. And I'm thrilled to get to spend time with you today and to talk about the future of GovCon, a subject that you bring a lot of context and experience in.
Well, it was great working with you back in the KBR days, and I'm delighted to be here with you at Precision Talent Solutions.
I was out there adding unprogrammed new work to a cost plus 10% award fee.
It's great. It was good value to the warfighter and the taxpayer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So yeah, just a little background on Bill Bodie. He and I have connected over the last several years and become kind of friends, and he's part of our community. But Bill brings so much to the table, and he's a young guy, and so it's hard to believe he's done all this. But he's done so much stuff. I can't name it all. I'm just gonna hit some of the highlights. He started out basically in a think tank. I think it's true.
That's correct.
Went into industry, worked in acquisition, and worked in the Air Force, and then got back in the industry side and was a executive with some big brands in the industry like KBR, Parsons, Fluor, and has lived around the world, lived in the Middle East, and here, over the last few years, he's gone into helping shape and guide the industry, working in think tanks. He's currently with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which to me is kind of the gold standard for think tanks. And he's doing a lot of good work there. So we're thrilled to have someone with a resume like Bill Bodie on the Future of GovCon podcast. Our mission here is to try and flush out what's been happening, what's happening today, and where do we think this industry is going in the future. So you can't have a better person on board than Bill Bodie. So Bill, were you excited? Have you been looking forward to the podcast?
Oh, absolutely. Especially the part where you said I was a young guy. Your listeners and especially your viewers may have a different view of that. And when we start going down memory lane, I think people will age me better. But no, it's delightful to be here. I have been fortunate enough to work in both the nonprofit sort of think tank, defense intellectual base, if you will, where I am now and where as you said, I got my start. I've also served in government with the Defense Department in two different capacities. One as a sort of an academic or a research person in the National Defense University, and then as a a political appointee within the Department of the Air Force, where I worked for the secretary. And then as you say, I worked with a bunch of different companies.
At the NDU, didn't you tell me that you were in the Institute for National Strategic Studies? Was that like a
Correct. That was an in-house sort of NDU think tank. It reported directly to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which was Colin Powell at the time. And I was responsible for sort of taking a look at what was going on in the immediate post-Soviet era with the republics that were surrounding the Russian Federation, and how all of the sort of political and strategic relationships were developing in the aftermath of the USSR. So it was a very interesting time, as it is today.
we'll have to come back to that because obviously that is a theme that's come full circle. Before we get in your professional career, just talk a little bit about growing up, family. How did you get into government? What the journey? What did you study? Uh, give us a little context.
Sure. Well, I was born in New York City, so I'm a native New Yorker. Lived
Which
around
borough?
the. I was born in Manhattan, but also lived in Queens, in Nassau County, both North Shore and South Shore. And then I went to a series of boarding schools in the region, including a military school in New Jersey and sort of civilian boarding school in Westchester County, and then eventually up in New England. I went to college in Manhattan and graduate school in Manhattan at Columbia and NYU, and during my time as an undergrad, I got very much into Russian history. It was probably because Columbia had a tremendous faculty on Soviet studies. Zbigniew Brzezinski was there, Marshall Schulman, a lot of great scholars, as well as literature and ancient Russian historians. So I just took to that sort of issue set, and I spent a couple of summers over in the Soviet Union on sort of student exchange programs. So that got me into it. My two passions when I was a young man was Russian history and theater and acting. I actually thought I was going to be a professional actor when I got out of school, and I don't know what was least practical, being a Russian history major or an actor. But for some reason, I was able to scrap together a living, after college and graduate school at NYU, where I also did a lot of political science stuff and that kind of thing. And
Were you around the military, like family in the military or government?
yeah, I mean, my father was a draftee in the Korean War. Two tours in Korea, including right there by the Yalu River, where he beat a hasty retreat with lots of lots of comrades, but he survived that, and not a lot of direct military relations. Of course, I told you I went to military school and sort of grew up reading a lot of military history, and then of course there's so much about the history of Russia and the Soviet Union that has to do with military affairs. So there was a sort of a natural osmosis in which I became sort of familiar, and then very motivated to learn more and to study and analyze the Soviet military complex and the whole strategy of the USSR. And that was really what I was doing in my sort of first professional job, which, as you said, was at a small think tank in New York, the National Strategy Information Center, where I was a writer and editor, and was working on things like Star Wars and the nuclear freeze and nuclear modernization. This was the sort of the end period of the Cold War, where there was a lot of military spending. Of course, there was a lot of great controversy about that spending and Ronald Reagan's Cold War policies. But it was it was a time where I think we were able to sort of add to to the public debate on a lot of defense issues. So that was my introduction to the professional world, and it wasn't a nonprofit. And as you said, I'm back there today. It's sort of the, well, I don't know if it's the end, but it's sort of closer to the end of my career back in the think tank world, looking at a lot of different issues. So
Were they thinking back then, as the USSR was coming apart? Were they thinking far enough to, like, how does this play out? Do they integrate in the Western world? Do they go through a transformation period and then go back in, kind of like they are now, back into a similar kind of, not necessarily, I think, not communism, but a similar kind of mindset? Did anybody see this coming back in the late 80s, early 90s, this kind of resurgence of Russia?
I would say to you, as a generalization about the sort of the field of Soviet studies, not only did they not sort of plot the future course of Russia, but I think the whole dissolution of the Soviet Union was a tremendous surprise to just about everybody in the sort of Soviet studies community. Not everyone. There were a couple of bold analysts like Andrew Marshall, who was in the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, and a few others. But the sort of conventional wisdom was that the Soviet Union was a stable regime, that it had tremendous natural resources and a planned economy that might not be the most innovative, but they would make up with quantity what they didn't have in quality. So when the Berlin Wall came down and sort of the rapid fire sort of decommunization, first of Eastern Europe and then the collapse of the Soviet Union, it did catch a lot of policymakers by surprise. And I think, what quickly became a kind of a new orthodoxy was that, that Russia was somehow going to be integrated, at least economically, into the West, and that, the Cold War was over, and that, we were at the end of history, and we would just go on and enjoy peace dividends for the near future. My own studies of what was going on in the Baltic states, in Ukraine especially, but also in the Central Asian republics, led me to a different conclusion, and that was that no matter how liberalized the Russian economy would become, how much it would import capitalist ideas or free market ideas, that the sort of imperial tendency, this feeling that the republics around its periphery did not really have the same the full sovereignty that you would recognize in say Western Europe, was very much there, especially with the Slavic republics and Ukraine among them, but also Belarus. And of course, there were a lot of Russian, ethnic Russians living in the Baltic states and some of the other republics. So even, back in the early days, you would hear terms in the Russian media about something called the near abroad. And, that sort of had an intonation that spoke to not quite a full breakaway from Russia, and I think the West contributed to that in a way. The United States put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons that were on their territory during the Soviet times. They put pressure on the Ukrainians to hand over the Black Sea Fleet to the Russian Navy. And all of this was supposed to be in return for security guarantees to the Ukrainians, which, as we know, in subsequent years did not quite play out. But I mean, I actually thought that there would be economic reforms, much like occurred in China under Deng Xiaoping, but that they would retain sort of the remnants of the sort of Leninist, Stalinist, Communist Party sort of bureaucratic mindset, and that they would especially retain the imperial perspectives that went back even before the Bolshevik Revolution, in terms of Russia being the sort of the first among equals, or the primus inter pares of the former Russian Empire and then Soviet Empire.
And now kind of the opposite has happened in a way, right? They picked up some of the capitalist, and have gone back, reverted kind of from a governmental, and now the resurging imperialism, right?
Oh, the imperialism, in many respects never went away. It went underground a little bit, but even the KGB was kind of reformed and renamed, but it didn't go out of business. And of course, Vladimir Putin was a professional, KGB officer during this time. And there are many people who believe that him serving in the KGB and in Eastern Germany during the end of the Cold War sort of branded him, in a way to want to reclaim that former Soviet greatness. In fact, he said that the dissolution of the USSR was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, which was quite an interesting take. But yeah, I think we have come full circle. It's a planned economy. It's a kleptocracy in a lot of ways. There is a reliance on fossil fuels and extractive industries. Very, very little innovation or technological advancement, and there's a lot of dependency on China now. So
more than ever,
yeah. So it's quite disappointing for those of us who saw a brighter future after the end of the communist period.
Yeah, we'll talk about how you see this playing out. Let's go back to your career. So early days in the think tank, New York City. How did you get on the industry side? How did you get into GovCon?
Well, it was kind of a roundabout way. You see, after I moved from the think tank in New York to actually a foundation in New York, a philanthropic organization called the Smith Richardson Foundation, which is still out there today. Public Policy Foundation. I was a grants officer, so I was responsible for sort of identifying interesting intellectuals and interesting publications and programs. And so through that world, I got to know a lot of academics, a lot of analysts, some of whom did work with the Pentagon, and I got to know some policy types and some officers there who were also defense intellectuals. And then when I was offered a position at National Defense University, I did a lot of work with people in the Pentagon, and one of those guys was a fellow named Jim Roach, who was the founding deputy director of the Office of Net Assessment, which was one of the sort of offices that really did grand strategy about America and the world back then in a way that was very comprehensive and very forward leaning. Anyway, he left government and then joined what was then called the Northrop Corporation. And we had gotten to know each other, when I was at the foundation and NDU. And he suddenly inherited a couple of positions in the Northrop corporate headquarters, including public affairs and executive communications. And he reached out to me and said, look, I want to have someone writing speeches for all of our executives and working on our corporate publications who actually has some background in defense issues, and because the world is changing a lot, and we need to have a substantive framework for a lot of our communications. So it was basically getting recruited from government to go into industry by somebody that I knew from my government days, and I went out to California for a New Yorker going out to California, and for a nonprofit guy going into corporate America. That it was quite a change, but it worked out well. I enjoyed writing the speeches and the various articles and so on within the public affairs group and at Northrop, and it was a very interesting time. As you know, it was the time of the the Last Supper, in which the Defense Department brought together all the CEOs of the major defense companies and said, Cold War's over, budget's coming down. We're trying to reorient our military towards sort of smaller but more high-tech force, and we're not going to be able to support the all of the companies that we have now. So you should think about divestments. You should think about mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of that happened. So being present during that time was a very interesting. It was a very interesting period in the defense industry as well.
I've heard of this Last Supper. Did this actually happen? They got them together for a meal, or
yes, yeah, it was exactly a supper, and the Secretary of Defense at the time, Bill Perry, and several others, and in fact, the current president of CSIS, where I am right now, John Hamre, was the comptroller of the Pentagon and then became Deputy Secretary of Defense. So he was present at all of this. Yes, there was an actual dinner with 6 or 10 of the sort of CEOs of then, the Lockheeds and Martin Mariettas and Grummans and Northrops, and they basically said, you guys either gotta get together, merge, consolidate, or get out of the business. And there was actually a lot of companies just sold their defense enterprise. And Northrop had to make a strategic choice at the time, and it decided it was known as basically the B-2 bomber company at the time. It basically had one prime contract, and there were many analysts on Wall Street and elsewhere who said that Northrop would be a seller, would sell itself to a Lockheed or what have you, and instead they decided to stay in the game, to purchase Grumman, purchased a couple of other defense electronics and systems integration companies. At one point, they did want to merge with Lockheed Martin, but it was blocked by the antitrust folks over in the Department of Treasury. So they remained remained independent, and today is one of the sort of five major primes and a very diversified company, a very healthy company.
So you went from think tank into strategic communications, I guess, is what you were doing?
Yes, it was called Executive Communications, and then when Northrop also purchased Westinghouse as part of this whole consolidation field. Northrop purchased the defense electronics business of Westinghouse, which was located in Baltimore. And so then I moved to Baltimore with Jim Roach, who became the president of that electronics division. And I was the director of communications there. So I was responsible for press and all of our executive communications, marketing, and that kind of thing. And that sort of led me into sort of understanding what business development and sales and all that stuff was all about. So, that was a precursor to, some of the positions I had with other companies later. But from Baltimore, Northrop Grumman's very successful integration of the Defense Electronics Group from Westinghouse, I went back into government with the George W. Bush administration when I worked for the Secretary of the Air Force, and that was a political job, but it was a kind of an analysis. I ran the Secretary's Action Group, and was the director of Air Force Communications. So working a lot with the liaisons, legislative liaisons, and the Chief of Staff's office and that kind of thing. So that was what I did immediately following Northrop Grumman in the early 2000s. So I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. So that was an interesting day. The funny thing about that was I was in the secretary's office with watching the television about what was going on in New York, and we heard a little bit of a rumble, but there was a lot of construction going on at the Pentagon at that time, so we really didn't think too much of it. And then instantly, there were 4 or 5 SWAT team special forces guys who came running in and grabbed the secretary and said, "You must come with us, sir." And they pulled him out, didn't say anything else, left me there by myself in the secretary's office. I said, either I'm very, very important or very unimportant. I don't know which. And then we got one of these sort of fire drill kind of messages to sort of, calmly leave the building. And it was only when we all got outside that we knew actually what happened, at least in our part, that part of the Pentagon. So yeah,
Did
that
that
was it was an interesting day.
psychologically, was that a milestone in your life? Was that a major
Well,
event?
the interesting thing was I was communicating via that great advanced communication device, the BlackBerry, with the secretary, and it was basically, we've got to get on with our work here. We had to get messages out to all the airmen, and we had to prepare for if there was medevac requirements up in New York City, and on and on. We were actually back at work, early the next morning after, being forced to evacuate the Pentagon. And immediately we were right into first, reconstitution activities, and then onto what became the global war on terrorism. So
Yeah.
I don't think I had a lot of time to think about what the effect on me was psychologically, but we just got back to work. And as we did some very innovative things in Afghanistan, working with unmanned vehicles with Hellfire missiles, and B-52 bombers, working with special forces guys on horseback. So there was a lot of experimentation, we were in the middle of all of that. The other thing that was very interesting is within a year after 9/11, the Air Force itself built something like 35 bases in the whole sort of CENTCOM area of operational responsibility. Many of which are no longer there. But I like to say that, the Air Force became one of the biggest construction companies in the world in the year after 9/11, building all of these airstrips across the region. But it changed a lot of what the Air Force's mission was, right? I mean, it became the tankers, the transport aircraft, the electronics, communications aircraft, and the sort of overall operations centers in the region to prosecute those operations. Far different from what during the Cold War period and even into the 90s, that we thought was going to be the major activities of the Air Force, which was competing with peer competitors and with traditional fighter and bomber operations. We became the world's biggest transport company and construction company. So it was an interesting time.
And then you were able to, then you left the Air Force on the government side, and how did you make it into industry?
Yeah, so I knew a lot of people in industry, obviously from my, previous experience, but I felt that I had a lot of sort of management and other kind of operational experience that could be utilized, in a new way. And so I got together with some people that I knew at what was then Halliburton owned a unit called Kellogg. It's called Brown and Root, that then became Kellogg Brown and Root. And that was what I like to call the sort of the era of LogCap, this giant logistics and life support services contract, which was KBR was the prime contractor for that. And I was first in charge of business development and marketing and communications, and then eventually became the president of the government and infrastructure business unit of KBR. So I was there during a couple of years in which KBR was the largest supplier to the United States Army, larger than all of the the Boeings and Lockheeds and Raytheons. It was purely a function, of course, of the support for the number of troops that we had in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere in the region. It was a major, it was the major support services contract in the world at the time. It was quite a challenge. It was quite an experience. I like to say that we never had a single mission failure throughout the entire period of LogCap 3. And we took a lot of slings and arrows in the press, and we were the sort of proxy for anyone who didn't like what was going on over there, and either for political reasons or what have you. And the fact that Halliburton had owned KBR, even though it was really an arm's length ownership, and that Dick Cheney had been the former CEO of Halliburton, sort of got all sorts of conspiracy theorist juices going, and we had to deal with a lot of that flack. But where the rubber met the road in theater, and I think you saw a lot of this, the commanders and the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines that we served, we're all very, very glad we were there.
Absolutely. I think back my time as a lieutenant in '96 in Bosnia, and the Brown Root guys did more for me than the entire command structure, from like taking care of my soldiers. And I was super proud to go back in supporting the military as part of Brown and Root and then KBR. So give me like quickly the highlight, like what's the pinnacle moment during your time at KBR? What was the star?
Well, interestingly enough, I spent most of 2007 actually, living in Iraq. So, it was mostly in, Camp Victory and, a couple of the other forward operating bases. And I think it was just the cumulative experience of being, in country, but dealing with a lot of the difficult issues there. But also always being so proud of the way in which, we put the troops first. And, KBR had this slogan, "We deliver." And a lot of people could say, well, is that just sort of a marketing thing? But it was something that was so deeply ingrained. But really the underlying sort of takeaway from that was the closer you got to where the actual operations were, the higher KBR's reputation was, and the views of its effectiveness. And keep in mind, Jake, you know this, but nobody else wanted that contract when it was first let. KBR took a contract that had a 1% award, 1% fee. That is 1% on all of the investments and all of the costs for supplying several 100,000 troops for years. 1%. Yeah, there was also some award of fee stuff, but that was hard to predict. And when it was bid out, nobody wanted it. Of course, when it became a $7 billion a year enterprise, people there were suddenly a lot of competitors wanted it. But it was certainly not a no bid contract. It was certainly not something that was full of waste, fraud, and abuse. In fact, the abuse that was basically taken was mostly by KBR. But again, the work got done. I think it revolutionized the way in which the military thought about how to outsource life support services. And in many respects, it continues to today. There are different sort of contract vehicles, and there are a lot more players involved. But I think LOCAP showed to the people who really understand this business how you could do legitimate outsourcing of logistical services to the private sector in ways that contributed to the mission of the U.S. military.
That's right. Yeah, that was the intent. Logistics civilian augmentation program, and to free up the warfighters to do the things that only they could do. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. I want to get through quickly through. You left KBR. You worked with Parsons and some other companies. Talk about that for a second. Let's get into talking about some of the changes we've seen.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, when the Obama administration came into office, and we were kind of trying to ramp down the deployments of large numbers of troops, the business of government contracting in that space sort of changed, and a lot of the sort of life support services firms sort of wanted to sort of move up a technological value chain and do more with software and more sort of higher end kind of services and advisory things. And Parsons was one of the firms that was at the head of that. Parsons goes back to the sort of World War II era of Liberty ships and all of that, and they did a lot of construction projects during the latter half of the 20th century, and of course into log cap era. But they also wanted to do more sophisticated kind of service work for the military and the intelligence community. Did some acquisitions, and so I was recruited by Parsons to manage one of their operating divisions that did work for the Department of Energy and DoD and some of the IC, my and then ultimately to run their Middle Eastern business unit, which also did a lot of sort of traditional program management and construction management work in the Gulf states. But it was a time in which a lot of companies that had been doing that sort of base operation support and that kind of thing were trying to sort of diversify, and that was what Parsons was trying to do, and I was helping them with that, and then of course to try to solidify their work as the Saudis this came out with their sort of plan to diversify their economy, and of course the Emiratis and so on. So there was a lot going on. That was it was during the sort of teens and early 20s, and so that was an interesting period too. And watching the civilian military mix there and the business mixes change with a lot of these companies was also interesting to watch.
So you've been on this journey from communications to government into the C-suite, leading large organizations, boots on the ground in Iraq, hands-on dealing with the customers, and then managing with Parsons and some other opportunities. Kind of a shift in the way contractors were used, both militaries and civilian applications, I guess. And now here you've gone back now, and you've taken a ton of experience from government, from industry, and now you're back at a very high level on in a think tank, looking at policy, looking kind of in the rearview mirror. So talk about, what have you seen? Let's go back the last 10 years. Let's go back to 2015 to now. What's the biggest change that you've seen in government contracting?
Well, I think that the biggest change I've seen has been the erosion of a clear sort of set of demand signals from the government to industry. Keep in mind that this is one of the few industries of its size in the United States that is a monopsony, that is a single buyer for services, which often skews the relationship that normally exists in a free market, right? Where you have many buyers, or consumers or business buyers, but you also have many suppliers. In the case of government contracting, I mean, ultimately it's one buyer. So you're very reliant upon the behavior of that buyer, and that behavior has changed in the last 10 years to, in effect, not keep up with the threats and the world as it exists, out there today. I like to think that we still have an acquisition system and a contracting system, and in many respects a military sort of organization system that would be recognized by Franklin Roosevelt or Woodrow Wilson or even Napoleon in many respects. And the world in the last 10 years, the pace of change, whether it's geopolitics, the rise of China, the advance of technologies, whether it's unmanned systems, precision weapons, defense electronics, of course, artificial intelligence, are the sort of structures by which our government assigns, develops requirements, and actually contracts for a lot of this stuff has not changed. At the same time, another trend has been, to me, the decay or the abdication of Congress as a thought leader in defense policy in the last 10 years. I mean, when we were growing up, at least when I was growing up, Jake, we had people like Scoop Jackson and John Tower and John McCain on the Senate side. You had people like Carl Vinson, Les Aspin, people who were real defense intellectuals and who asserted their Article I constitutional role as an overseer of the defense budget, as players in the development of policy, and as the actual funders of this work. I never thought I would say this as someone who was in the executive branch. We had lots of fights and battles with congressional staff and so on. But I've come to think that was creative tension, and that what we have today with this endless series of continuing resolutions, and we're out of the sort of the normal order of the armed services committees coming up with blueprints, and then the appropriators working with OMB and the services to sort of put together something that is strategically directed. Congress has faded from that view, and I think to the detriment of good strategy.
25 has been, there's been a lot of transformational years. This is a year of transformation, no doubt. What do you see? What are the big things happening this year that will have an impact on the future of the industry?
Well, of course, we have a new administration, but also an administration that has experience from a first term. So you've got a few people in the White House who have experience and know what they want to do differently, and you have a lot of new people sort of in the defense department and the defense community. They've also come in with a new mindset about the industrial base and the kinds of things they're looking for. And you've got a Deputy Secretary of Defense, Stephen Weinberg, who was a venture capitalist. He had an investment firm that invested in many sort of defense startups. So he's got a perspective on the industry that I think is actually very healthy. And he's very much in the background. He doesn't do press or anything like that, but he does understand the industry. He sees the innovations that have taken place with what's going on in Silicon Valley, and the sort of the defense technology offshoots from Silicon Valley that are now becoming more mature. And I think that what we're going to see going forward is an emphasis on harnessing that kind of innovation. Now, we still have a lot of these sclerotic structures in the Pentagon that inhibit the fast, agile, move fast and break things kind of mentality. Keep in mind, a lot of the traditional defense companies, they're not just sitting on their hands. A lot of them are investing very heavily in emerging technologies. In the application of AI into national security, for example, the advancement of drone and unmanned systems, the linking of manned and unmanned systems. They're doing a lot of work on that. And so I think, the defense technology, the advancement of technological investment by traditional players, the Golden Dome initiative, I think, is going to have a very broad impact, even if the actual vision of it isn't completely implemented. There's going to be a lot of work done, a lot of innovative work done on space systems, on the integration of space systems with air breathing systems, and the linkages within command and control and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance throughout the kill chain, if you will, is going to be tremendously accelerated by this initiative. And I think it's going to last beyond the term of this president, because I think we're going to discover some things that we're going to want to keep regardless of who the next president is.
So let's go a little bit forward. Not 10 years, not even 5 years. Let's go to 2028. And I want you to kind of take a stand on, what do you think the industry is going to look like? What do you think kind of our foreign policy posture is going to look like? What do you think our focus is going to be on from a defense policy perspective? Give us 3 years from now, not too far out, the tail end of this administration, we would assume. What do we look like? What's the industry look like?
Well, the industry is going to respond to the demand signals and the incentives that are put out there by the monopsonist, right? I do think that on a geopolitical level, if you look at, say, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Bridge Colby, they're very, very serious about reorienting our sort of strategic posture in the Pacific. We've talked about it for many years, but I think that's going to be that is really going to be turbocharged in the next couple 3 years. Along with that is, okay, what are going to be the requirements? What kind of a fight would we have if deterrence fails in the Indo-Pacific region? Well, that means it's going to be an air, space, and principally maritime kind of event. Those are the capabilities that are going to deter, and those are the capabilities that are going to have to fight if indeed we get into an armed conflict in that region. That doesn't say that it's not to say that the Army is going to be going away. By the way, the Army has a tremendous role in Golden Dome and in the missile defense more broadly, and has some of the greatest expertise on this down in Huntsville and elsewhere. But I see this reorientation towards the Pacific, the implications of that. Companies that are doing logistics and services are going to have to add value greater than what they were able to do during the sort of the global war on terrorism era, and everything is going to be moved forward with a lot of these new technologies, and they're going to have applications everywhere. I mean, AI is going to have applications in everything from logistics to the most sophisticated battle management. And companies that are able to master that and identify the use cases and put investments against them are going to be the ones that are going to be going to be successful. I do think that we're going to have to ramp up on a consistent basis our spending on defense as a percentage of GDP. By the way, we're very much below what we were not only in the height of the Cold War, but historically. We're barely at 3%. We're talking to the NATO allies about going to 3 to 3.5 to 5%, and we're beating up on the Australians and the Japanese. I think we need to become more on a war footing if we're going to send the right demand signals to the industry. That doesn't mean we're looking for conflict, and I desperately hope that we do not have a conflict over Taiwan or an armed conflict with China or anybody else. But as you look at the world environment, what's going on in Ukraine, the tensions in Europe, the tensions in the Middle East with Iran, North Korea still going full hog on its nuclear capabilities, and China, who has been very, very vocal about its grand strategy of disrupting the U.S.-led international order. We need to, become much more serious about that. I think that we are, but we're going to have to walk the talk.
And let's go full circle with your career. You started out reading Russian literature and studying Russians back when the Soviet Empire was happening. What does that situation look like with Russia, with Ukraine in 2028?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's heart wrenching to me. It is, someone who helped with the first strategic studies conference between the United States Defense Department and the government of Ukraine in 1992, to think about the sort of proper defense posture for democratic Ukraine, coming back here in actually since 2014, but really in a very significant way since 2022, to see what's going on. It's if you want to talk about psychological impact, that's had a great psychological impact on me. But in terms of the policy world, I do think that the outcome of this conflict in Ukraine is going to have significant implications for global security. If Ukraine either is forced to accept some kind of a peace deal that essentially sort of subjugates it to this current Russian regime, I think it's going to have tremendously bad consequences and will embolden bad actors around the world. So there's a strategic imperative about supporting Ukraine, as well as the moral and historical development of reasons for supporting Ukraine. And I could take you down the history from from Rurik and the Vikings in 800 all the way down. Vladimir Putin either does not know the real history, or he's utilizing a kind of a fake version of history in order to make a propaganda point that is going to sort of help with the shoring up his political position. But if Ukraine goes, we're gonna have problems all around the rest of the world. And
are we 2028? Is there peace in Ukraine?
I think there could be a cessation of hostilities, but cessation of hostilities does not mean peace.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think that the underlying causes of this war, which come from the Russian side, in my judgment, and are rooted in historical commitments, grievances, etc., are the cause. It had nothing to do with Ukraine talking about EU membership or wanting to join NATO or anything like that. And so, I mean, I think we could arrive at some kind of a ceasefire that results in something along the lines of the armistice in Korea. I just pray that kind of ceasefire would be as durable as the armistice that has taken place in Korea, which, by the way, is the only reason it's lasted for 75 years is because of the commitment of the U.S. military to the defense of the Republic of Korea. I don't know if we're ready to do that with Ukraine.
So I want you to take one word. You get one word. You're just to describe your sentiment, your feeling about the future of government contracting.
You're talking to a Shakespearean actor. It's hard for me to reduce things, as your listeners, I'm sure, know by now. It reminds me of the reporter asked Boris Yeltsin in 1993, President Yeltsin, how are Russian-American relations in one word? And he answered, good. And he said, well, can you explain Russia-U.S. relations in two words? Not good. So I think in one word, I'd say optimistic. Two words, cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. That's hyphenated then. That's good.
Yes.
It's and those of you that are in the theater scene in the greater Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, Bill Bodie is playing King Lear, which is a kind of an ironic storyline in this day and age in many fronts. So is that an escape for you to go in to do theater and acting? Is that to step out of your kind of your normal role in life?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's a return to, as I told you, what I was sort of my twin passions in, as an undergraduate all those years ago was, Russian history and theater. And I maintained that throughout all my other crazy jobs. I wasn't always doing acting when I was living over there in Iraq, but I did do some theater when I was living in the UAE, and it's it's more than a hobby, I would say, but it's not quite a living. But yes, I'm fortunate. I've been fortunate with my job here at CSIS to also be able to participate in various theaters around the region, and yes, currently doing King Lear in Greenbelt, Maryland, and plenty of good seats available.
It's out now. Okay. He even did this during COVID. He was doing theater during COVID.
Yeah. A lot of Zoom plays.
Very innovative. Very cool.
Yes.
Hey,
Exactly.
Bill, fantastic. Could talk for hours just on the Russian thread alone, but to hear your experience, your journey from a career perspective, the impact you've had on the industry. I know there are a lot of fans out there. It'd be great if we could do this on a Q&A thing, because I bet it'd be lit up right now on a lot of the different topics we cover. But thanks for coming out. It means a lot to me. Thanks to CSIS for loaning you out for an hour to share some ideas and thoughts with this community. And, to our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, definitely share it. Tell your friends about it. And, if you have any questions or ideas, reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, and make sure you're following Precision Talent Solutions on LinkedIn. We're putting out information every day about the industry, contract awards, major programs, M&A. So make sure you're tracking us. Bill, I want to have you back not too far in the future, because things are happening quickly and you have just great perspective. Thanks again.
I appreciate that, Jake. Thanks very much. And congrats to Precision Talent Solutions on your business, but on this new adventure of yours. It's terrific.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, Bill. See you soon. Bye, everybody. So thanks for joining me on the future of GovCon. If you enjoyed today's conversation, share it with a friend, follow the podcast, and subscribe to YouTube so you don't miss our bold predictions shaping our industry. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and learn more about Precision Talent Solutions at pts.careers. Thanks for tuning into the future of GovCon, and see you next week.